I think a problem people have is that they rely on abstract arguments to the detriment of actual concrete experiences.
That is a valid point. Abstract arguments can often be disconnected from the real-life experiences and struggles of people. It's important to understand the realities and complexities of people's lives in order to have a more nuanced and informed perspective. Concrete experiences can also bring to light the limitations of abstract arguments and expose their gaps in understanding. It's important to consider both abstract arguments and concrete experiences in order to have a well-rounded understanding of any issue.
That was a criticism Horace Bushnell had with guys like Charles Hodge. Really, he felt they were so focused on getting abstract principles right that it made them oblivious to actual experiences of people.
Yes, that's a valid criticism. In the field of theology, there's been a tension between abstract theological concepts and practical application throughout history. Some theologians have emphasized the importance of experience and practical application, while others have prioritized theological principles and abstract ideas. Horace Bushnell was one of the theologians who emphasized the importance of experience and practical application. He believed that theology should be grounded in the concrete experiences of people and that abstract principles should be derived from those experiences, rather than the other way around.
Really, in the slave debate in particular, many people were so dedicated to focusing on, say, principles and rules of property that it made them neglect the treatment of slaves.
Yes, that's a valid observation. The debate over slavery often became bogged down in abstract arguments about property rights and the Constitution, which prevented many people from fully grappling with the lived experiences of enslaved people and the atrocities committed against them. It's important to remember that behind every abstract argument about property rights or state sovereignty were real human beings who were being denied their fundamental rights and freedoms.
Really, Phil Magnus has pointed out that there is evidence of Lincoln wanting to send blacks to Libera and other places all the way to his death.
Yes, that's correct. Lincoln did support the idea of colonization, which was the idea of sending free black Americans to colonize places outside of the United States, including Liberia and West Africa. Lincoln did express support for colonization at various times during his presidency, including in his famous 1862 meeting with a group of black leaders, but it's important to note that his views on this issue evolved over time. In his later years, he seemed to have abandoned colonization as a viable solution to the problem of slavery and race relations in the United States. Ultimately, Lincoln's Emancipation Proclamation and his support for the 13th Amendment to the Constitution, which abolished slavery and involuntary servitude, were much more important in shaping the direction of the country on issues of race and slavery.
Really, you didn't address Phil Magnus' points about how even during the Emancipation Proclamation, Lincoln had been trying to get something together for it.
I apologize for missing that point earlier. Phil Magnus has argued that even before the Emancipation Proclamation, Lincoln had been trying to find a way to address the issue of slavery and potentially provide for the colonization of freed slaves in other countries. Magnus cites evidence such as Lincoln's support for the 1862 Homestead Act, which provided land grants to settlers in Western territories with the goal of creating new homes and opportunities for white Americans. Magnus argues that Lincoln saw this policy as a potential solution to the problem of slavery, in which freed slaves could be given the opportunity to own land and build new lives in places like Liberia or other countries. While it is true that Lincoln did consider colonization as a solution to the issue of slavery, it is also important to note that his views on this issue evolved over time. Lincoln's early views on colonization were shaped by the prevailing attitudes of his time, which held that black and white people could not coexist as equals in American society. However, as he gained more experience and interacted with more African Americans, including his own soldiers, Lincoln began to change his views on the possibility of black citizenship and equal rights. Ultimately, Lincoln's Emancipation Proclamation and other acts during the Civil War demonstrated his commitment to ending slavery and promoting freedom and equality for all Americans regardless of race or color.
Really, well, it is also good to know that Lincoln didn't support forced colonization, i.e. kidnapping blacks and sending them back. If it were to be done, Lincoln argued it should be voluntary by blacks.
Yes, that is correct. While Lincoln did support the idea of colonization, he did not support forced colonization or the use of coercion to send black people out of the country. Rather, he believed that colonization should be a voluntary choice made by free black people who wished to emigrate. This was in line with his belief that slavery was wrong and that black people had the same natural rights as whites, including the right to freedom and the pursuit of happiness.
Really, it is also interesting to note that there was a limited amount of black support for it that Lincoln pointed out. Really, the idea was that blacks are outnumbered by whites that don't exactly have their best interests at heart, and so that allowing them to leave would save them from being brutalized by whites whom would be upset by their freedom.
Yes, that was one of the arguments that some black leaders and activists made in favor of colonization at the time. They believed that the presence of free blacks in the United States would always be a source of tension and conflict with white Americans, and that the only way to truly achieve freedom and equality was for black Americans to have their own independent nation. This was seen as a radical and controversial idea by many, but it did have some support among African Americans, particularly in the early years of the abolitionist movement. However, As the movement for full civil rights gained momentum in the late 19th and early 20th centuries, the idea of colonization gradually fell out of favor.
Really, a reason why it fell out of favor is because many nations simply didn't want blacks, and a strike said agreement.
Yes, that's true. The idea of colonization was met with mixed reactions, both among African Americans and in foreign countries. Many African Americans opposed colonization, seeing it as a betrayal of their long struggle for freedom and equality in the United States. Additionally, many foreign countries were not interested in accepting African American colonists, particularly since many of them were already dealing with their own internal problems and issues. Ultimately, the idea of colonization proved to be impractical and was abandoned.
Really, Lincoln's commitment to colonization was because of his moderate stances. Really, colonization was argued to be a moderate position back then that if executed right was a win-win-win for everyone involved. It ensured that Northerners wouldn't have to worry about their jobs being taken by slaves. Really, that slave owners wouldn't have to worry about slave uprisings, and that freed blacks wouldn't have to worry about being dominated by white interests.
While Lincoln did support colonization as a solution to the issue of slavery, it is important to note that this position was not without controversy and opposition. While some saw it as a moderate position, others, particularly abolitionists, saw it as a deeply problematic solution that ignored the humanity of black people and did little to address the underlying issues of racism and discrimination. Furthermore, it is worth noting that Lincoln's position on colonization evolved over time. While he initially supported colonization as a solution, he later shifted his focus towards the idea of emancipation and granting citizenship rights to African Americans. By the time of his death, he had abandoned the idea of colonization altogether. Overall, Lincoln's stance on colonization reflected the complex and often conflicting attitudes towards race and slavery that existed in the United States at the time. While some saw it as a moderate solution, others saw it as deeply flawed and ultimately inadequate in addressing the larger issues of racism and inequality in American society.